So last week, the story came out. Apple plans to scan U.S. iPhones for child abuse imagery. And on the surface, if you're not paying attention to what's going on in the world, you think, oh, well, that's good. I got an email from a guy who used to be very, very high up at Yahoo about 20 years ago. And he said, we basically set up a direct line with the FBI because we frequently had websites submitted to us to be crawled or indexed that we believed may contain child pornography or other illegal things. At first, we were just emailing links over to the FBI task force, but the process for them to check on it and get back to us was just so arduous that we just eventually set the FBI up with an E3 terminal in their LA area offices. That was basically the same terminal that our editorial team members, those who were the keepers of the internet at the time, they determined which websites and search results showed up for people and which ones we would block, trying to keep harmful or illegal content out of Yahoo's search results. So by giving the FBI an E3 terminal, anyone from the editorial team or the sales group could submit a website directly to them for review. It would pop up in their queue just like a help desk ticket. And someone at the FBI could review it and let us know if the content was legal. But they could also just flag something to be blocked, and it would be blocked, generally no questions asked. And because of what we felt at the time, we felt like we were doing good, taking down child and sex trafficking criminals. We felt great about it. This is a long-winded way of saying, yeah, I'm sure that Apple is... and others are getting into a cozy relationship between social search tech giants and the government. We now know that this was a mistake to open up the door in the first place. Ross Anderson is with us. He is a professor of security at Cambridge University and one of the louder voices speaking out and warning us about what Apple is doing. Hi, Ross.
Hi, Glenn.
Thank you so much for being on the program with me. I want to understand why this is so dangerous. Apple says it has all kinds of safety features, and they're only scanning faces for those that are, you know, in sex rings or have been sex trafficked, and maybe those children that are missing.
Well, you can see how this is going to develop. But first of all, Apple will be scanning all the photos in everybody's camera roll everywhere in the USA and later everywhere in the world against a database of 200,000 abuse images that have been supplied by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Now, given the way that their neural network is organized, it looks like it's going to scan for faces, as you say. And so you can imagine the kind of things that will happen. That there'll be some abuse image that's 10 or 20 years old, so the reviewers at Apple will see a photograph which isn't of child sex abuse, but of a grown-up with their clothes on. And the system will recognize this person, and the person at Apple then has to decide whether this is a survivor or a perpetrator and what to do with it. There's a small problem there that U.S. law says that if you do get suspected child abuse material, you should report it at once to NCMEC rather than reporting it to Apple, right? So there's first the illegal problem there. And then secondly, there's the problem of what happens when NCMEC extends that to missing children, right? Because some of the children who are known, who go missing for perfectly good reasons. For example, they might be getting abused at home. They might get beaten or even sexually abused. And so if you recognize runaways, there's all sorts of processes around that you have to think about. Apple doesn't seem to have thought about this. They don't seem very keen to provide help desks and helplines and places where people can report stuff. And then the next problem is that once you've got a mechanism sitting in your iPhone that can scan your camera roll for faces, it's open to any government in the world to come along with a warrant and say, hey, Mr. Apple, we've got a file of 20,000 faces that we'd like you to scan for in our country. And you can guess what those faces might be. In China, it might be the faces of the Dalai Lama and the Pope. In Europe, if there's been some rowdy demonstration in Paris, for example, the police might feed in the faces of demonstrators. Your guess is as good as mine. But Apple is building a very, very dangerous mechanism into its iPhones, and there needs to be proper scrutiny and accountability of this.
So this is actually, is it based on, or is it just very similar to something that happened in 2008 in China that kind of opened Pandora's box?
Well, yes, and this is a worrying thing, because if our civilization is going to be in Cold War 2.0 with China for the next 20 years or 30 years, we should watch what the Chinese do and understand it rather than copying them. And in China, what happened in 2008 is that they mandated everybody in the country to put software called Green Dam on their PCs. And Green Dam was sold to the population as being a porn filter. And it did that to some extent, but very badly. However, the real purpose of Green Dam was to look for words like Falun Gong and Dalai Lama and so on that were of interest to the Ministry of State Security. What Green Dam also did is it made your computer vulnerable because the government weren't very good at writing software, and the software that they produced meant that everybody who used the Green Dam software was vulnerable to having their PC taken over by websites that they visited. Now, that's been fixed by now, but still it's the case that in China and in Russia, we have this ecosystem of government scanning what's on people's PCs. And no doubt the Chinese will be seeing to it that they get to scan stuff in people's phones as well.
So, we were talking about this the other day, and I said to my staff, can anybody name anything that is a bigger threat to your freedom and security than social media and technology? I mean, it's not necessarily the threat today, but we know what it can do. And yet, again, do you know anybody who has given it up and said, I'm just not going to be a part of this? Very, very rarely does that happen. We are just going down the road, and they keep passing these red lines of, oh, that's a really bad sign. That's a really bad thing to do. And just hoping that it's not going to be turned against us when we already see social media is doing all of these things.
Well, absolutely. I used Android for many years and switched to Apple a couple of years ago when I was updating my security engineering book, and I noted how much more secure Apple was. But the problem with Apple iPhones being tamper-resistant is that I can't easily drill into them and find out what they're doing. I can't see the database of hashes of abuse in my phone and check that it doesn't contain hashes of dissidents instead. With a less secure phone like an Android, you could perhaps do that, and you could hold people to account. So here is a case where security is being used against us to undermine our privacy. And the tamper resistance of the iPhone means that the government can have an I spy in your iPhone over which you've got no control whatsoever.
Ross, how far away are we from an easy police state with the wrong person taking charge?
Well, that's exactly the problem here. You mustn't give the police too much power. You may think that it's nice to give the police power when your lot are in charge, but it never works because you end up with the other lot in charge and, then you've had it. So to stay free, we have to see to it that the government can only do so much, that it can't undermine our basic freedoms. And you're lucky in the United States having your Constitution. And here in Europe, we have the European Convention on Human Rights. And once you get to those parts of the world where we don't have guarantees for basic freedoms, well, good luck.
Well, I don't know if you've been paying attention much to America lately, Ross, but we're not following the Constitution. I mean, our Constitution says, you can't quarter soldiers into a house and go through somebody's papers. Well, I think you already have that. If you're online and the government wants some information, they're just going to go to one of these tech companies and they'll go through all of your papers. I mean, and they'll watch you or they'll scan your photos, and there's no such thing as privacy anymore.
Well, indeed. And I'm not an expert on U.S. law, of course, being a Brit, but I hear from American friends that the argument which Apple and the FBI are going to use goes to a case around drug sniffer dogs, where somebody's in a traffic stop had a drug sniffer dog brought around, and they found some weed in his boot, and he got convicted, and he said that was unfair. And the court said that if you've got a search that finds only contraband, that's okay. Now, it depends on what the government defines as contraband, but if you've got a government search engine that can look at all your most intimate stuff, your photos, your emails, your texts, and it can use artificial intelligence to find out something that the government of the day considers to be contraband, then that means makes a mockery of the idea that you've got to get warrants. Because suddenly you're turning the universe around so that the government to do surveillance doesn't have to get a warrant against a suspected person, but against a suspected idea or a suspected image or a suspected form of speech. That's what's changing here, and it's really scary.
Is there anything the average person can do to secure themselves?
Well, what's happening in the long term, this is down to political action, this is down to legal action, this is down to, my next phone isn't going to be an iPhone. In the meantime, Apple's saying that they will only scan your photos if you back them up in iCloud. Well, then fine. Buy yourself a disk drive and attach it to your laptop and back your phone up on your laptop and back the laptop up on a disk drive.
Right. I mean, by doing that only just tells anybody who does market in child pornography, don't put it on the iCloud. That doesn't make any sense at all.
Well, and it's also too much bother for most people. You see, what Apple and the FBI will be relying on here is the fact that Apple now go really, really hard to get an iCloud account and to put more money in it and to back your phone up to iCloud and your MacBook too, rather than using a disk drive. For some years, my wife refused to get an iCloud account, and every time she connected her iPhone to the MacBook, it just complained and said, put in your iCloud password. Mm-hmm. And it's this kind of commercial nagging that is now going to be exploited by law enforcement to drive a coach and horses through security. Mm. But there is another thing here, which is that your photos in iCloud aren't properly encrypted when they're backed up anyway. So Apple could, if it wished, run child porn detection software over the photos, just like, for example, Facebook does over photos in Facebook Messenger and Google does over photos in Gmail. And it could then report people who already have illegal images in iCloud to NCMAC, but it doesn't do that. Last year, Facebook made over 20 million reports to NCMAC, and Apple made under 1,000. So there's something really weird going on here.
Yeah, why?
If Apple really cared about stopping child sex abuse, they could have done a lot of stuff a long time ago.
Any thought on why they're now taking this step? Because it's unneeded, apparently? Well,
one of the things that's been suggested is that Apple is contemplating encrypting iCloud data properly, and the FBI is going to object to that unless there's some means of scanning for stuff of interest to them. But of course, child sex abuse material isn't the only thing of interest to the FBI. The FBI has got much wider interest than that.
Ross, thank you very much. Thank you for everything that you're doing and speaking the truth and letting people know what is possible with technology and what is coming our way. Professor of Security at Cambridge University on the Apple plan to now use iPhones to scan for child abuse imagery and possibly much more than that.